Uh, Welcome again to this week's session of Parsha Shavua. This evening, we're going to, as an extension of last week's Parsha, when we talked a bit about the continuity of the Jewish people. What will ensure the future of our people? And last week, we focused on the idea of the kaporet and the kruvim actually formed straight out of that slab of gold, which was formed into the kaporet, which actually was set upon the Aron Kodesh, which contained the luchot. And last week, I'd like to just remind you, last week I mentioned a very beautiful thought by Rav Hirsch, because he brings our attention to the fact that the kruvim themselves, as they emerged, as it were, from the kaporet itself, were not directly guarding the luchot, but rather they were, so to speak, standing guard over the kaporet, which itself stood guard over the luchot itself. And Rav Hirsch, we concluded last week with this statement by Rav Shamshon Raphael Hirsch. By guarding and taking care of God's Torah, one becomes a cherub for oneself and for God. The protection one gives to God's Torah becomes one's own protection. And at the same time, makes one become a bearer of the glory of God on earth. With every effort Israel makes to carry out and protect God's Torah, it achieves only its own preservation and furthers its own well-being and happiness, and prepares itself to be the home to the glory of God on earth. So when we protect the Torah, we are really creating our own protectors. And that was how I left it last week. And I want to continue that theme this week, as we are literally 24 hours away from Purim, which in itself speaks of the ability of the Jews to be able to survive in a non-Jewish environment, and very, very often a hostile environment. First, I'd like to read for you a medrash, which talks about the very opening psukim of our parsha, which concern themselves with the lighting of the menorah, the procuring of the oil, the shemen zayit zach, and the lighting of the menorah, which in itself was, while it was not one of the furnishings of in other words, the last week we dealt with the furnishings of the Mishkan, and of course its structure itself, but the shemen, which the Jews were also to collect, and as well and to donate, as well as the besamim, these two elements were not furnishings; they were a part of the actual avoda itself, the actual service to HaKadosh Baruch. Now, the Sefer HaChinuch tells us that we are commanded, Shetzivanu Hashem lihiyot ner daluk beveit hamikdash. Hashem commanded us that there is to be lit in the Beit HaMikdash, and of course, its forebearer, the Mishkan, lahagdalat habayit, in order to enhance God's house, lechavod uletifaret, as a matter of glory and majesty. Be'enei ha'ro'im. Now, the Sefer HaChinuch says that all of this is done for the purpose of us, not for God, but rather to enhance our ability to understand the magnificence of the Mishkan. Ki kain derech b'nei ish lihitkabed devatehem b'nei rot dolkim. So he said, of course, this is long before the time of Edison, but people then and even now, we use lights and to to enhance the beauty of the locations in which we find ourselves, and of course in our own house as well. All of this is so that a person should actually internalize a sense of awe and a sense of humility. That's why we have the menorah lit, Sener Tamid. As Rashi says, Tamid here doesn't mean it never is extinguished. It means that there is never a night which goes where the menorah was not lit. And so he says also that I've said before many times, says the Sefer Chinuch, that all this is done for the benefit of the people, not for God, that it enhances our appreciation of the location in which we find ourselves. Now, we're going to, I want to share with you, number one, a statement by the Gemara, which indicates how these candles are to be lit. Lahalot ner tamid. The Gemara said, the Mishnah says, not Mishnah, I'm sorry, the Medrash says, Abituy hazeh lahadlakat haner mitzanuhu rak b'shaychut la'avodat hamenorah. The idea that we have to, of how we light the ner, that it should be shetehei shal hevet olam me'aleh, which is taken from Sifra, it's taken from the Medrash, that when the Kohen was to light the menorah, he was to set the lighting aspect onto the wick and not to remove it until such time as it was evident that the wick itself can go on its own. Okay, so it's not a matter of touching it and then eventually it goes up, but rather he is to make sure that when he engages the lighting wick with the wick which is to be lighted in the menorah, so he does not leave it, it stays there until such time as the wick goes, as the flame goes on its own. So of course the question is, it seems like it's a detail. Is it a technicality? Make sure that you light it in such a way that it won't go out first. That probably happens to us in our homes when we light Shabbos candles once in a while. We'll see it goes out, so, or Hanukkah licht. But in menorah, it was a special halacha that it was not to be the ner tamid, or the wick, was to remain on the candle itself, and not the candle, but the wick that was to be lit until the flame went out by itself. Now, from this, Rav Hirsch, again, I refer you to Rav Hirsch, he makes the following statement, that from here we can see, he says, from here we can see that the purpose of every teacher is to make himself or herself dispensable to the children. What does that mean? It means that we are a nation in which universal education for each and every child is mandated and required for every parent, for every community. And the Rav, the teacher, who insists on making the children always dependent upon him or upon her, is doing not only a disservice to the child, but that teacher is actually guilty of a certain degree of malfeasance when it comes to education. The job of the teacher is to make the child self-sufficient, not independent so that they'll never have to consult. Of course, we all know that Judaism has the other element to it, and that is know when to ask a shaila, to realize that we don't know everything, but so that a child, as she or he grows into adulthood, is able to make basic decisions so they don't have to always depend upon a teacher. That is the lesson, says Rav Hirsch, of that the Vayikra Rabbah wants to teach us, that you stay with the child until you see that indeed his own personality, his own intellect is coming forth on its own, then you know you've done your job. Then you disengage to the degree that it's appropriate. Now, this concept of universal Jewish education as that which guarantees the future of our people begins with Moshe Rabbeinu. Interestingly, this parsha is Lahalot Ner Tabid, and the parsha that I'm going to draw from to substantiate what we just said, what we first just said, and what others said, is from Parshat Ba'alotcha. Ba'alotcha Kanei wrote. Once again, it is the idea of making sure that the light of the candle is able to subsist on its own. If you recall, in Sefer Bamidbar, in Parashat Ba'alotcha, we find that Moshe Rabbeinu finds it very difficult to bear all of the difficulties of the desert. And so then Hashem says to him, convene a Sanhedrin, convene a group of Zikanim, Shivim Zikanim, 70 elders, and they will assist you. And the Torah tells us that in fact, these people then had and most of them, it was a temporary inspiration from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It went away, except for two people, Eldad and Medad. These two people remained, and they were still continuing to say their nevuah, so to speak, after the others had departed. Yehoshua, Moshe Rabbeinu's trusted student, he was disturbed. He was very disturbed. Vayan Yehoshua ben Nun misharet Moshe, the one Yehoshua ben Nun who served Moshe Rabbeinu at every juncture. Vayomar, and he said, Adoni Moshe, Kala'im, restrain them. They're a threat to you. These are now people who are saying nevuah, and Yehoshua at that time believed that nevuah should be the province of Moshe Rabbeinu only. He could not conceive of others being able to have the divine inspiration to carry on. Right, and now here comes the pasuk itself, which is the centerpiece of Jewish life for the next 3,000 years until this very day. Vayomer lo Moshe. Moshe Rabbeinu said to Yehoshua, Hamakaneh ata li? Are you zealous for me? Are you so fearful that I will be displaced because other people also are receiving divine inspiration? And then Moshe Rabbeinu says, Umi yitain kol am Hashem nevi'im. Halavai, every single Jew would be another. This sets the tone for Jewish life from the time of Moshe Rabbeinu until we speak here this evening. So the future of the Jewish people, Moshe Rabbeinu knew it. The future of the Jewish people is in the universal knowledge that Jews will have. And of course, that comes only when from childhood, when we send our children to school, that we give them the education that we can, that then becomes one of the guarantors of our future life and our future. Now, I decided to bring a fascinating Medrash Rabbah. This Medrash Rabbah is on route, because tomorrow night, of course, is Purim. So I thought I'd share with you something along this theme that we find in the Medrash Rabbah. It's found in Perek Yud, in Esther. It's found in Perek Yud of the Medrash Rabbah, Siman Dalet. Now, it begins with the fact that Haman, as Haman decides he wants to hang Mordechai on the tree that he had, and on the gallows that he had prepared, but he had to get permission to do it. So he goes to Achashverosh, who do again Nadada Shnat HaMelech, HaKadosh Baruch Hu had Achashverosh have a very difficult night sleeping, And so therefore he did what a person with his personality would want to do. Bring me the record of all people who have done nice things for me. That'll put me at ease, and I'll go back to sleep. So sure enough, it then is recorded that how Mordechai had saved Achashverosh from two would-be assassins, Bigtan and Teresh. They were killed. Mordechai had not been rewarded, and the king decides he wants to reward him. And of course, as literally when the king wants to know who can help him, Vayavo Haman. Haman came, and the king asked him, what should we do for the person that the king wishes to honor? And then he, of course, Haman believes, who else would the king want to honor more than me? And so therefore he says, dress him in the king's clothes, give him the king's horse, etc. So then the Medrash picks up from here. Achashverosh says to Haman, Maher kachet alavush ve'atasus, go take exactly the horse that you suggested and the king's clothing. I like that idea. Go put them on Mordechai Hayudi. That, of course, now is the turning point of the story in the Haggadah. And then, of course, he takes them and he goes now absolutely morose, downtrodden, and he knows he has to go to Mordechai. In the meantime, the Medrash tells us, now, one of the, I oftentimes try to say that, first of all, they say that that a novel, the essence of a novel is that it is a great lie which is designed to reveal the truth. That's what all fiction is. Fiction is not necessarily intended to deceive people. That's already a lie. But it is a presentation, whether it's an allegory or whether it's a metaphor or whatever it may be, that device which is used, and the Medrash uses them often, it is designed to reveal the truth, even though historically it may or may not have happened. In this case, it's rather unlikely, as you will see. As soon as, Haman now goes to find Mordechai. And as soon as it became evident to Mordechai that Haman was coming his way, Haman is coming because he's downtrodden, because he knows he has to do probably the anathema of what he would want to do. And Mordechai, it says, Nityare ad ma'od. Mordechai became terribly upset. Of course, one of the things we have to, this is Mordechai. Mordechai is the person who provoked all of this. And the thought that he would become distressed because Haman, who certainly wanted to kill him, was on his way there, does not seem to fit. And the Medrash knows that. Why? Because here's the reason for his distress. He was teaching Torah. At that time, according to the Medrash, he was teaching Torah. And he said to his students, children, run away, and separate yourself from here. Don't be here. That you should not be burned as a byproduct of my turning into coals, so to speak, as Haman wishes to kill me, because I know that that's what he wants to do. So they said to him, according to the Medrash, they said to him, Rebbe, they said, Im tamut namut imach. They follow in the footsteps of Ruth Moaviyah, and they said, if you die, we'll die with you. We're not running away anyway. So Mordechai said to them, if so, na'amod b'tfilah. Let us stand. The word amidah usually is what Chazal use as the position of prayer. We'll daven, the nipater, and if indeed we die, we'll die mitoch tfilah. The Medrash says it wasn't that simple, because they davened and he didn't exactly get there yet. And then they concluded the davening and they sat down and they decided to learn. That's what Jews do. That's what Jews did then. That's what Jews did in Auschwitz. That's what Jews did during the Inquisition. They kept their lives together as much as they possibly could. So they sat down to learn. But the Medrash is not done there. Why? Because it says, what were they learning? Okay, what were they learning? They were learning that day. That day was the 16th day of Nisan. And so they the mitzvah of the day would be the mitzvah of bringing a korban home, bringing the omer. As you recall, before Jews can eat from the current crop, the omer had to have been brought. Nowadays, we just simply say that by the second night of Pesach, we start counting the omer, so to speak. That's what we do, and it is a zeicher lemikdash of what we did in the time of the Beit HaMikdash. So the Medrash says, what were they learning? The 16th of Nisan. That's the day the Omer was to have been brought in Eretz Yisrael. Even though 70 years prior, it had been dormant. This mitzvah had been physically dormant for all of these decades. Yet, what were they learning? They were learning the laws of bringing the Omer. Now comes the part which is most difficult to understand. Haman comes along and he sees them, sees the children. And he comes to them apparently calmly. The Medrash seems to say quite calmly, Bama atun oskim. So tell me what you're learning. What sugi are you in? Right? A little bit of a stretch. But nevertheless, he says, what are you doing? And they told him, we are learning about bringing the Omer, the grain offering, the very first grain offering from the very first harvest that we have, and we are seeing how it applies. So Haman now becomes very curious, and he says, how's it performed? They said, well, what you do is you from the first crop of Omer, the Kohen takes a small amount of it, like a handful of it, and then he brings it. Amar Lon, he said to them, what is this Omer? What is it? All right, I know that it's, but at the time, by the way, I misspoke. They had not told him yet what it is. They just told him that it's the Omer. And he said, well, what is the Omer? He says, is it gold? They said, no. Is it silver? No, it's not silver. So they said, not only is it not gold or silver, it is not even of the choicest grain. You specifically bring the Omer from Seorah, animal fodder, things in the barley, which in those days especially, people didn't find to be that appetizing. So he said to them, how much do you bring? And they said to him, well, you just bring a very small amount, the equivalent maybe of 10 small silver coins. He said to them, and they said that's sufficient. And he said to them, and this is the key, Amar Lon, Kumu, you may now get up. Haman said to the Jewish children, Din tzachun asra minchon la asra alfei kanterin ichsafti li. Your 10 small coins worth of grain shall triumph over my over my thousands, my 10,000 measures of gold or silver. So obviously, I don't think we need to believe that this conversation took place directly, but the Medrash is telling us the secret of Jewish survival, and it's what we spoke about last week and this week. The secret of Jewish survival is Jewish children and Jewish education. That Mordechai sat down with the children to learn, even though all of them knew they were in mortal danger. That scenario has played itself out tens of thousands of times through crusades, through pogroms, through the Holocaust, over and over and over again. The Torah and the preservation of Torah is what has assured the Jewish people's survival. Now, it is because it is Purim. I wish to tomorrow night, Mirz Hashem, when we celebrate this, I want to just say two small things about Purim. The first is, let's see if I think, yeah, you can see it. That's right. When Chazal decided to set up their first holiday, they realized you need behaviors to solidify the holiday. In America, we don't do that. And the reason we don't do it is because we do not dictate in our democracy how people should behave. You can go all day the 4th of July, never go to a barbecue, never go to never go to a baseball game or go golfing or anything else. And you can be a very good American. And if you say, I slept all day, 4th of July, that's fine. But Chazal knew that we are established, the first Jewish holiday established after the giving of the Torah, that holiday needs to be concretized through our behavior. So they gave us 4 basic mitzvot. The first, and all 4 of these mitzvot actually relate to the self. The first is the idea of community. It is a mitzvah for Jews to hear the Megillah 2 times, and ideally to hear it within a minyan. If as in times like this, the minyan is more difficult, that's something that we also, halacha provides for. But ideally, could be in shul. The second element is that of taking care of the disadvantaged, namely matanot le'evyonim, providing for those who cannot provide for themselves. That's the second one. The third, in the upper corner, is the idea of reconnecting with peers, that it doesn't matter how wealthy or how, shall we say, poor the person is, you can be mekayim the mitzvah of matanot le'evyonim, of mishloach manot, sending gifts, each le'reo, each to from one person to another. And the fourth is that of mishteh, a seuda, eating a joyful family meal. And Judaism is such, the stress on the family, as the family unit is really the centerpiece of Jewish life. So Chazal knew that we faced destruction. And when they came to establish a holiday that would last for decades and millennia, they knew that it had to be concretized in actions. And each of those actions is designed to strengthen the self, myself, with the community by going to the Megillah, with the people who cannot help themselves, the poor, through matanot le'evyonim. And these are not voluntary things. These are activities that unless we do them, our observance of Purim has been in some way damaged. Peers, mishloach manot, doesn't matter who we can give it to. We can give it to Rothschild, we can give it our next door neighbor, but we can be mekayim and fulfill the mitzvah of re-establishing, reconnecting with peers. And finally, the last element of myself with the Jewish people is family, the family unit. Now, of course, it's not limited to nowadays it is, but near to Hashem, the day will come where it's not going to be limited to family alone. But the idea is the family becomes the centerpiece. So once I've done all of these things, and once everybody has done all of these things, connected themselves to these 4 basic elements of the Jewish community, the community is strengthened. I want to conclude with one story that has left an impression on me for many years. Rabbi Meir Yugent Zatzal was, as many of you know, he was a teacher, of course, in the spirit of the Jewish people. He taught children, but he lived an extraordinarily sad life. According to the stories, he was engaged when the Nazis came, and then he was taken off to a work labor camp, slave camp. She was taken off and she was murdered. He never saw her again. And Rabbi Yugent lived a life of solitude. He taught his students. He lived in a very simple quarters in the yeshiva in Skokie. And that was the life he lived. Students were very, especially at the academy, he taught at the academy, they were very attentive to him. They understood him. And he, I think, in many ways understood them. But the point I want to make is one day he was talking to me and he said to me, Michael, why do you think the Chachamim established matanot le'evyonim, giving gifts to people? Why? Okay, well, everybody can understand. We always give to the poor. We always eat, right? They tried to kill us. They couldn't. Let's eat. right? That's the standard Jewish mantra. And then you have the situation where that we must be in shul and daven. Good, but what is it about? What is it about matanot levyonim, giving gifts? Seems trite, seems trivial. And he answered as follows: that if the whole story of Purim played itself out over just about a year, from Pesach, as we talked about, let's say, and it carried out for 11 months, all the way to the 13th, and then, of course, the 14th and 15th of Adar, when we, thank God, were saved. So he said, picture it. All of the anti-Semites, month after month, day after day, would tell us we're worthless, we're meaningless, we have that our lives are not worth anything. And of course, Rabbi Eugene said, if you hear that day after day, week after week, month after month, you begin to believe it. Maybe I have no value. What is a gift? A gift that is given, let's say a man of means is invited over by a poor person to have a Shabbos meal. There is nothing materially that the poor person or even the simple person can provide the wealthy person that he couldn't get himself, and probably even more. Yet when he leaves, he thanks his host, and he means it. He leaves. What is it that this person gave to the other person? He gave him the gift of chavershav. He gave him the gift of two people who now are closer together. He gave him the gift of friendship. And that's something that's irreplaceable. When you give someone a gift, what you're really saying, no matter how small the gift is, you matter to me. And please take this token of how much you matter to me. Because after all, nowadays it's no longer a token, when we're giving out mishloach manot. But in the end, its minimum halachic requirement is simply a token. It's a token of what one Jew feels and must feel for the other. And that, he says, is the key to Jewish survival. So just in sum, the key to Jewish survival is education, universal education. And that very concept was set forth by Moshe Rabbeinu. It carried itself on throughout the generations, to the point where we see on Purim itself, Mordechai, the central piece of Mordechai's life was that he was a teacher of children, 12,000 students, they say. And so that carries itself out. And then the idea that we as Jews now should use Purim to reconnect, because we've been disconnected for a while, to do our best in accordance with all of the proper standards to reconnect with each other, and thus strengthen Klal Yisrael, and therein will be hopefully the insurance of our survival. Thank you very much. Purim Sameach, everyone.
Purim Sameach, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Okay.